Hmm. Yeah, just inviting maybe a moment of just like checking in with the body. You can close the eyes, you can leave them open, but just sort of noticing what's alive, noticing where you're at, noticing your breath, noticing any energy, any tension in the body, and just sort of witnessing it without any judgment. Maybe a little bit of gentle movement to sort of facilitate dropping into the body. Just noticing if there's some gentle, subtle movement that you can do just to drop a little bit deeper. Noticing what's on your heart today, what's on your mind. What is the sort of energy that you're bringing into this space? And just knowing that all of it is welcome. Mm. Maybe gently opening the eyes and just checking in with your surroundings. Sort of noticing what's around you. Maybe noticing something that you're like drawn to for whatever reason. Maybe it's something you see in the space around you. Maybe it's something you can feel on your skin. And just sort of allowing your senses to soften into that pleasure. Maybe tuning into your screen and just noticing the face you see on the screen and just landing in the space. Mm. Hmm. Integration is a sort of tricky concept. It's so much more complex than all of the sort of processes that we go through beforehand, of like activating and awakening and, you know, the dots that we connect and the integration process itself is like really the most challenging aspect of it, right? Because we're also so deeply conditioned in a culture that is always like inviting us to move forward and keep going and keep taking in and keep sort of progressing. Um, but integration, in my perspective, is really the true expression of progress, right? It's embodiment, and but it does feel like very often a sort of pausing and a slowing down, and the body needs a literal pause to integrate, right? It needs space to sort of settle and time to like, you know, land into the spirit of whatever it is we've explored and moved through. Um, and a lot of it is a sort of completely intuitive subconscious thing that just happens. It's very organic. But a lot of it is more conscious, and we can do more conscious reflecting to support it. Um, but the intention of this space is just like, just sort of notice, right? Because everyone's integration is going to be different, it's going to be unique. But to sort of notice, like, what, you might have had the pieces that were coming to you during this container. And maybe not even directly from the container. It could have been from other aspects of your life that happen to just have like a thread of connection or reflect in some way. And you might have had those pieces that you were like, oh, this is what's happening. This is what's moving. This is what I'm healing. This is what I'm integrating. And then at the end of the container, you might have had a different awareness of like, oh, this is what it was about. But I think it's interesting to always like check back a little bit of time later to actually give some real space to almost forget about it, actually, like actually completely forget about it. right? So that the body can do its intuitive organic thing. But to sort of check back and reflect on, like, okay, so I know some of the themes that were relevant for me, that I moved through, that I'm still maybe working on, but also to notice, like, are there other pieces that come up? Maybe things that you've been noticing in your life right now that maybe don't seem to have an immediate obvious connection, but like on further reflection, you can feel there's a thread. Or even noticing, like, what is the next chapter that you're sort of opening? And while again that chapter might be a very different chapter from the previous one, like we step right from one chapter to another, and just maybe noticing, like, what has this work of exploring the womb and the voice and just your feminine landscape, like, not just what you've gotten out of it, right, but like also like where, what has it opened you to, and where is it maybe like directing you towards, and just sort of like broadening our perspective of like all the ways that integration can look, and all the sort of yeah, all the ways it can kind of play out, and the ways that we can explore it more consciously. So we can do a sort of free flow sharing, and for anyone, I know Isis is just listening, so you don't have to actively participate. You can also write in the chat, whatever feels right, but just like taking a moment to sort of, and maybe you've actively been reflecting on like the integration and what has come through, maybe you haven't, and both are totally fine, but just taking a moment to sort of notice, and maybe even asking the body, what like where are we now after that journey, you know, and just seeing like what comes up, and sharing if you would like to share that, and just seeing where the conversation wants to go.
I can share a little bit. So, yeah, it's been such a profound journey. I was reflecting that at the start of this, yes, I connected to my womb with like my moon cycle. I was always, tracking it and being in reverence with that piece, but the actual connection of the womb up to the voice was a piece that like was always in my periphery, something that I knew was connected, knew needed perhaps more love and care and attention, and I just hadn't, yeah, gone into the depths like I did within this container. And I can really feel some pieces have shifted that feel now like an ongoing part of my process. Like I've been trying most mornings to check in. How does my body feel? How's my heart? How's my connection to spirit? And also, how's my womb? What does my womb want to say? Any messages, or to just be like present with her. And through that has been just such a deep remembrance of the feminine way. And I can just feel like the bigness of that process every time that I, stop and drop into my womb, and the depth of her message, the depth of her heartbeat, the depth of her voice and all of that. So it's been so profound to connect to that and to build that relationship. And at the same time, what life is right now is like this huge expansion of capacity. And I'm like, I'm doing it, but it's like uncomfy in ways. And I can feel old patterns of like maybe like the shadowed masculine coming back, or yeah, just like how easy it is to get out of that like deep listening space. And kind of basically within the last month, I'm nomadic right now, but I came to Boulder, Colorado for the first time in my life on a whim, and I'm house sitting for 2 months, and yeah, just meeting community and stuff like that. So that was a big change. And then the next day I had like a contract job start. So it's, amazing because it's flexible and it can support my life now, but it's kind of bringing in that like old energy of, I used to be an engineer, a project manager. Those are great skills. But so much of what I've discovered about myself is this like deeper medicine woman and these deeper knowings, and to like how to integrate these pieces, the song of my womb with some of these more like I don't know, tactical pieces, I guess. And then I also released like a really core soul sister who's going through something right now, and I for sure have like danced with grief for a lot of my life without even knowing it, just because of my mother wound. But this feels like a really like, oh, I did not expect to be grieving at this point in my life and this this relationship. So to also feel like just like the depths of what grief means, and I know it's a teacher, and to be human is to grieve, even though I'm like, what, this? Like, I didn't plan or expect this in any capacity. So yeah, there's just been like a huge process to my heart for it to like crack open and to feel, to also regulate and notice all the like guilt or shame programming and stuff that's wanting to be like released through this process. And then also the power of my womb. And all of this, what I just shared, kind of also stacked over me getting my bleed at the same time too. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna do it. We're going full out. But just recognizing too, and it's just the way that I'm continuing to work with my menstrual cycle, is to recognize like it's an ancient technology, and to really tune into like what am I actually releasing. And when I tune into releasing this relationship and grief, like the moon, my moon time, and my blood that I'm releasing just like feels so deep and so tender. So I'm really, yeah, grateful for these perspectives that I'm integrating, and I feel like happy and excited in a lot of ways, expansive, and I'm just like, oh, this is a lot. It feels like a lot, and I feel like it's been my whole life is, expanding capacity in different ways. So yeah, I'm used to this discomfort in some ways, but yeah, also I just want to create something new and different. And even as I relate to like contract work or consulting part-time, I want to be like my medicine woman there as much as I can. I want to like be able to really tune into the wisdom of my womb in some capacity, and like be in relationship with that while I still have to, bring in these other parts of my life. And then also with my voice and continuing to release her. And it's been so fun. I feel her getting freer and freer. And I think a big part of that is like opening up my heart so I can really like feel the love or feel the grief or feel whatever is there, and like let that come through my voice. And then as we did in the practices, like going down to the womb and like feeling the depth of what's there and expressing that. Yeah, and it's just cool because I feel like through all the exercises that you shared, and I'm still working through them, but it's so cool because it really supports me into like dropping into like a deep state of like channeling, and I'm just so excited for what's already organically coming through, and how that'll, be its own journey that'll guide me as well. So I thank you so much for, yeah, creating such a beautiful and resonant like program, and for you all for sharing space. And yeah, like when you shared just now that like integration literally just requires space, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to also just be quiet and like not do anything and like be a blob in a park, maybe sit down for a while, not even reflecting, like just resting and letting it all continue to integrate and process. So yeah, thanks for that. That's my share.
Thank you for sharing. There's a little bee that came and visited while you were sharing, and took a suicide dive into my water, and I had to fish it out. And now it's just hanging out here with us. um, yeah, I relate and resonate with a lot that you've shared. I feel like there is a really big connection between womb work and deepening our capacity. I think a lot of women have this experience of like being like, I mean, most people in general struggle with capacity, and there's a big correlation to that and like our nervous systems, right? And just like all the unintegrated trauma and like disassociation from our bodies and all of that. But I think it's something that women struggle with in general, is like holding everything, and being sensitive, like, and also, being in a world that is so out of alignment with their body and their rhythms, which automatically like will limit and challenge your capacity, right? Like being in an environment that is not like hospitable really to who you are. But I noticed that womb work does invite this deepening of capacity, and a lot of what where we hold as women is our wombs, and it's where we create from, and it is, in my personal perspective, like the core of our body, you know and I notice in myself, like whenever I've had a period of doing a lot of womb work, or I'm just in that practice, there is this constant invitation towards not just expanding capacity, but also like getting into right relationship with it. Because for me, as someone who's like always been very sensitive and had very limited capacity, there's always just been that desire to like expand. Like, let me just expand it. I need more. Rather than necessarily be like, well, wait a second, what's actually going on with the capacity? Like, let's get, intimate with that. And, womb work, in essence, we release a lot. We hold in the womb, and there's so much we hold in our womb space that isn't for us to hold. And when we are able to release a lot of that, that automatically gives us, a new capacity, and it automatically opens this question, like almost from the body, of like, oh my, what are we going to create now? Now that we have the space. And yeah, I have found that exploring my capacity and my nervous system, and my ability to hold and release and create, I have to root it in my womb. Otherwise, from my perspective, it's disembodied, right? Because it's literally not in my body anymore, and I can't explore holding, I can't explore creation without the womb space. Yeah, I've been noticing, just really coming out of the container, like the weeks following, so much shadow work, a lot of anger, a ton of rage. And I'm still in the process of reclaiming my rage, because I've spent most of my life as like totally disassociated from anger as a boundary and protection mechanism, and like only freezing and only fawning, and actually not knowing how to move through charge with a sort of fight, anger, protection response. And so in the past years, I've been just like on the journey of reclaiming it. And yeah, I've just, those past weeks closing the container, after closing it, just so much rage, and sometimes rage for particular things, rage and grief for what's happening in the world, a lot of ancestral rage, like a lot of just like feminine rage for all of the women who have come before me. But then sometimes just like pure rage, just rage in the body that has been waiting to be moved and metabolized. And yeah, I've gotten to a place where I like have really started to like celebrate it, and I'm excited when it shows up, because I'm like, because it's so new for me, and it feels like, for me, it actually feels like a new sort of tool that I've like unlocked. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I've unlocked, like I'm at that point in like the video game where like I now have this as like my tool, and not having any judgment, not polarizing it, not seeing it as like a sort of like bad or potentially like harmful thing, knowing that it can be, but also like trusting myself with it, you know? And also just a lot of fear patterns that I've been finding like literally in my pelvis. I do a lot of internal pelvic massage. It's just like, starting with like yoni mapping, and then actually inserting the fingers and mapping and like feeling the internal pelvic bowl, so like the vagina. And that has probably become like my favorite practice of all time. Like I've never been more I've never experienced a practice that like touches the root of my shit so deeply. So like just the root of everything. And that's really what's led me to know that like everything is in our pelvic bowl, everything is in the womb space. And it's allowed me to like literally touch the heart of all of that unintegrated shit and trauma and fear. And it's just been so amazing to also feel like where in the bowl I'm holding that and actually like come to know like there's like literal mapped out sections that have a whole story. And that when I fall into fear or control patterns with my partner, or when I'm worried about like survival and stability and money, or whatever it is, like that there's a literal contraction tension pattern that actually is happening physically in my body. um and I've just been sitting with that a lot and really recognizing like that there's a lot I've done sort of like emotionally mentally around those like fear patterns, but now I'm in this place of like actually getting into the tissue and what the tissue is actually held in relationship to it. And it's just such an amazing experience, and I'm like continually blown away by it. I've been in this practice for like over a year now, but coming out of this container like really opened something in relationship to it. And yeah, I've just been really sitting with the shadows, like these deep like maiden fears, the fear of the maiden who is like not comfortable, not trusting in herself, not standing in her power, not comfortable with her anger, not comfortable with her, with her man, like, and just all of those like unintegrated maiden fears really really have come up following, and they didn't really come up during the container, but following it was just like it all just came to the surface. So it's been really interesting to just welcome her and like not judge her and just like hold space for her to like, and also give myself permission to be her, like not have to be like, oh, I'm just going to integrate it but without like being it because like ew. But actually being like, oh, let me like be her for a little bit and like fall apart or be like super dramatic or overreact or whatever it is, and actually like, but while I'm in it actually be present with it and sit with it and yeah, like let it metabolize and like move sort of through me. um yeah, I always find like it's the period after a container like this where so much happens that I don't even realize is happening. And also just trusting that sometimes like our processes are also different. Sometimes we need like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of like not thinking about it, not tapping into it, and not seemingly doing any integration or work around it. Sometimes our body, especially if it's a lot of new like big energy that we've opened up, sometimes our body literally needs that break. And sometimes our body is totally ready and is like, oh, we've opened the gate, so here I have like a ton of other stuff that I want to share with you. But just sort of trusting that however it's showing up is perfect, and like your body will always give you sort of what you're ready for. But yeah, that's sort of been my experience and what I just reflect on in response to what you've shared, Leanne. Um, and I don't know, Alexandria, if you want to share today or if you just want to drop in the chat something, both are very much welcome. I'm just going to let my dog out for a moment. Here, bud.
Yeah, I could share a little bit. I feel like in general, integration is kind of like abstract for me. I know like this past week I've had to like pull my energy back from a lot of like different like places and people. So I think maybe like I'm integrating things this week. Um I feel like in the last few months, like since this container, I think I've gained more awareness in my womb space and also like my root. I feel like I've had awareness in the past of like the middle of my body and my upper body, and my upper chakras, but like the lower chakras were always kind of I wasn't really like as aware of them. So I feel like I've also been developing like womb, what people talk about when they say like womb consciousness. I feel like I could feel it more. Uh, I think one thing that I sometimes wonder about too is like practice. I guess like how spiritual practice relates to like integration. I know like more recently I feel like I've been trying to integrate being in my body more often, like in like moment to moment. But yeah, I think I still have like some like disconnect between like spiritual practice and then like integration or like yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's all that's coming through. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, integration is a very, in a lot of ways, very abstract. And I feel like, I mean, I've been like exploring integration for years now, but like I'm still sort of like uncovering layers to it that are simultaneously so simple, so straightforward, and yet so complicated for us as humans who, like, most of us have gone through our lives somewhat disembodied, somewhat disassociated. um but for me, I'm really starting to understand integration more and more as like something that happens in our body, as well as the way in which we consciously understand and like place our experiences. This is why I think like journaling is an incredibly powerful integration practice. Whether that's in response to prompts, and maybe, you know what, maybe I'll drop a couple, maybe I'll share some prompts in like the final email, or put them at the end of the container in the program materials, just to like have some, if that's, it's not something you have to do, but if that's something that's supportive. But just in general, like journaling is really, really beautiful because it gives you an opportunity to sort of pull from your awareness, like, what are the pieces that are alive for me? What were the pieces that stood out for me? How do I feel about them? How do they relate to other experiences I've had in my life? How do I understand them now? um, I actually do. I'm going to share a little document at the end of the program materials because I have a little piece that I wrote, like a sort of step by step concept of like what integration is. Um, that can be sort of helpful just to like ground it a little bit, because otherwise it can be a sort of elusive, abstract concept. Um, but I think a really helpful piece is also just noticing it in the body and understanding that the body also integrates like on a like tissue level, right? There are things that we like release in a process like vocal womb rewilding, but there are also things we awaken and sort of like unlock or open up to, and the body does need time to sort of like calibrate to that, because it's a shift in frequency, it's a shift in vibration when we release something or when we open up to something. So the body also just does need time to process. And sometimes, like, a really intense integration process can look like being completely out of commission and just like I just need to lay around all day and like literally not do anything. I can't talk to anyone. I don't want to like, I don't even want to consciously think about like the work that I've been doing, you know. So actually like giving ourselves a break from the work, from the inner work, from the conscious work, from even the spiritual practice, like letting ourselves take a break from it and just sort of like go dormant, because the body energetically needs to calibrate. um and not seeing that as like, oh, am I moving away? Am I like regressing? Am I going backwards? Right? And typically that experience in general, where we sort of can start to feel like, oh, am I going backwards right now? Am I like undoing what I've done? Is usually a symptom of the opposite. Because when our awareness expands, we start to see things we just couldn't see before. We have like a heightened awareness of it. And that can sometimes cause us to really notice a pattern that suddenly we're playing out and we're like, oh my God, did I always do it like this? Like, is this getting worse? And typically that is like a beautiful sign that like we're actually sort of like continuing to grow and integrate, because we're just like expanding the field of what we can see and know. But I really do encourage journaling for integration. If you're not as like if actually writing is not as resonant for you, like voice notes and just like talking aloud, stream of consciousness can be very supportive as well. There's not like a specific way that we need to journal. Of course, talking about it, right? The way that we're talking about it. But then also having a practice with the body, you know, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for you, whatever makes you feel most connected to your body, and just sort of like letting it like settle into the new body that you're in, right? The new vibrational field that you're sort of carrying. And also just like trusting that you're integrating, because there is a part of integration that is very organic. One of the ways that we bypass integration is when we skip ahead. So when we literally don't give ourselves time to digest. Integration is digestion, right? So it's like if you were just like eating and eating and eating, but like you were never giving yourself time to digest, at some point you would be so full that you would be uncomfortable, you know? So like that's just like a easier way to relate to integration. But as long as we're giving ourselves space, right, and we're not rushing ahead or like skipping to the next activation release process, and we're giving ourselves space, like integration does organically happen as well. And it just trusting that and like trusting yourself in it is also really important, because the more we're at ease in ourselves and trusting the process, the more aware we are of the intuitive cues and messages and communications from the body, right? When we're like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing this right, I must be doing it wrong. There can be like a hypervigilance that happens in the body, and that actually like disassociates us from any intuitive guidance and integration, you know, message that we might receive. But I'm curious, like, and we can just make this like a sort of free flow, like, you know, share at will. But I'm just curious, like when you all think about integration, and this is not like a question that you have to get right. It's just like, what does that feel like for you, or what do you like find your body or your spirit or your heart like sort of calling you towards, when you think about that, you know? Or maybe you have like a specific integration practice that you really love, or you know.
I resonate with what you shared, with it being both like a somatic, physical shift that's organic, but also, you know, might take some like body work or other things to like be with. So that part resonates. And then also there's a part of me that like, I guess wants to like mentally integrate, which I think there's some like really healthy parts of that. But then I can also see like the part of my brain trying to, okay, I need to understand the lesson, and then where do I apply it? And then, so I need to set, maybe this is my like Virgo sign, like, so I need to set little reminders to like drop into my womb. And it's in those moments I feel like I almost forget like the essence of my womb and the essence of all of these teachings when I'm like, okay, check mark, did I check in with my womb today? Like, yes, it's helpful so that I remember to drop in. Like, I appreciate the reminder. But sometimes I can feel almost this like frantic energy of like, there's so many things that are important to me now that I want to give time and space to. And yeah, it's like I don't want to, like, I really want to integrate by releasing that like energy I can put on it sometimes. Release the urgency, the have tos, all of that. And what you were sharing earlier with like we exist in a system that's not naturally conducive to our womb or to being women. It's like to give ourselves lots of grace. That like, oh yeah, if it's feeling like effort to like connect here and then do this and do that and with all blah 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 blah, like of course we are in a system that is not the natural way, at least in our society. And like I wasn't taught that by my grandma. I wasn't taught that by my mother. Like this is also like baby giraffe learning that she has womb, learning how to walk and learning how to do homework and stuff like that. So yeah, that's definitely like the piece of that like franticness that I'd like to soften, because I know behind that is it's just fear. Like it's just fear of whether that's like stuff that was in my system already that I'm just needs to be discharged, or I don't know. So yeah, I guess that's my reflection, and I would
Yeah, it is definitely like a balance between the sort of structured approach to integration and actually having your ducks in a row, and like, having that sort of clear understanding. Like this idea of like wanting to wrap everything up in a bow. Like I had that for so long, where I was like at the end of every experience I was like, and I got really good at it. And it's something you can like learn to do, but you could get so good at it that you like start missing the point, right? So like I would be like, oh, I can like, and I could like explain it to anyone who asked me and like wrap it up in a bow and be like, this is what it was about. And then sort of got to a point where I was like, it just like wasn't working for me anymore, and it just wasn't like feeling good. And I was like, okay, because there is always a part at the end of any experience that is just mystery, and can I just feel that in the body and like feel sort of the elusive essence of it and trust it without knowing it and understanding it, and sort of like using the structured approach to support that experience. And that's where like the structure of the masculine serves the feminine, right? But it should only be like applied in service to the sort of like being experience of the feminine. So like what you come out of an experience with, like holding in your body, like the somatic, like spiritual sort of experience of it that you can't put into words. And we use the structure of the masculine and the journaling and the talking and the like intellectual understanding to sort of just create a container for that to be. But what's tricky is to keep that from sort of like building it so much that we like just sort of cover up that mysterious sort of pearl. But I also love this idea of, and to me it's like this experience is like this like digging process where I sort of sit with the top layer of like my intellectual cerebral thing of like, so I can reflect on like this container for me. I moved a lot around my shadows of rage and like that huntress archetype, and giving myself permission to be, and I could like talk about that for an hour, right? Or I could sort of like just tune into that and then like dig down a layer. Like, so like, what is that about? Okay, well, that's sort of about like actually giving myself permission to like trust the impulses that come through my body. If that's a rage impulse, like actually trusting it and learning how to actually be with it, spending time personally in practice so that I know how to be with it, so that when I'm with people, I know how to express it in a way that's like harmonious. But then like continuing to just like dig and dig. Okay, so like, what does that mean? And what does that mean? Until I get to like what I feel like is like a pearl. And that pearl to me almost feels like it could be described in like a sentence or like a word, or maybe there isn't even a word for it, but you just feel it. And for me, it feels like this, like the pearl of that feels like this, like literally like the process of like relaxing the tissue in the body. And like I feel this like softening around my hips. And just that softening is what allows me to then feel those impulses, but then also trust them. And then also know intuitively how to be in relationship to them. But I like this practice of like digging down, like sitting with the top intellectual layer and then just continuing to dig down into like the most like somatic or like spiritual non-verbal essence or pearl of it, because it's actually, to me, much simpler to integrate a pearl like that than to integrate an entire intellectual construct that I've just created on like what my experience was about, right? Like for me to like integrate that whole intellectual construct, it's a lot of like mental acrobatics. I'm like, how am I going to apply that? Where am I going to do? And then I'm over here, and then I have to do that. Whereas sitting with that pearl is like, okay, so what is the integration of that? That's like literally learning to hold it in my body. And I like, for me, I'm very like imaginative and visual, and so I like all of that is very supportive for me. I mean, I literally visualize this sort of like orb pearl that is holding the sort of texture and energy of that medicine, which I might name like a softening, but I also could just like not name it and just like connect to the energy. And then like this idea of actually like learning to hold that in my body and noticing how when I can actually hold it without words, without any mental acrobatics, like what happens in my body. And that to me, I've just found like has simplified my integration process, because my integration used to be so much more like just too many acrobatics, like thinking about it too much, referencing my journals all the time, like just like too much of that. And this practice has sort of simplified it, because I know what that core medicine is without having to name it. And can I just invite that into my day, into my body, without thinking about it, without having to understand it even. Um, having 10 minutes of just like moving with it and noticing what happens when I let it in, or when something happens in my field that makes me contract or like disassociate, inviting it in and noticing how it wants to like teach me to be, and yeah, it's like really simplified that process for me in a lot of ways, and has brought it much like back to the body and back to the feminine, because the feminine, she doesn't want all the acrobatics, she doesn't want all the explanations, she doesn't want the intellectual constructs, right? She just is, she just moves, she breathes, she dances, it's very like sort of totally free shakti, expression and experience. And so yeah, that's just like a piece that comes up when I think about that. Oh, and that actually then makes me wonder, if you want to answer this, if anyone wants to answer this, like if you were to take a moment to sort of like dig down, and it might take a second, so you're like, take a second if you need to, to sort of notice the most conscious, like top layer of your understanding, like all of the words that you've used, right? Everything that you've just said to explain your integration process. But if you were to sort of start like digging down, and I like to like energetically like dig down into that understanding. And with every dig, you're just like simplifying it, meaning you're using less and less words. And you're simplifying it until you can only use one word, or maybe no words at all. It's just a feeling, maybe. Maybe it's a feeling you get in your body, or it's a single word that you get. Like if you were to feel the vibrational transmission of the entire intellectual understanding that you have, if you were to feel that as a vibrational transmission that's like 1 second in your body, just like noticing like, what does that feel like? Maybe you see colors, maybe it's a physical experience, maybe there's an emotion, maybe there's a word or a picture. And just trusting whatever comes up. And typically we get to a concept or a word that's like very basic and simple. And for me, I'm getting this feeling of like trust. And that's the word that's coming to me, trust. Like a radical, complete trust in self. But then also softening. And sort of how the trust flows into the softening, and the softening flows into the trust. And I feel it in like as a somatic thing in my body. And just noticing how just the titrating between the trust and the softening, how that opens something up in the body. Something that I can't understand, couldn't wrap my head around if I tried, and I certainly can't control, but is like so pure and primal and divine, something divinely sort of woven into the body. And that just by allowing that simple process of trusting and softening and trusting and softening, that experience organically, whatever medicine is there, whatever wisdom is there, it's just there. And it actually is allowed to organically unfold without anything I have to do on my end. And knowing that part of that trusting and that softening is also having things come up that trigger the ability to trust, right? That push sort of like the capacity of trust, and knowing that that's part of the process as well.
For me, the word that it distills to is remembrance. Remembrance of my womb. I feel like that was just the word that kind of encompasses the entirety of what this journey and this odyssey has been. And there is like that intangible, felt feeling when I just tune in and presence that word, and specifically presence it in my womb as well. Because with that, like, there's nothing that I have to do to remember. I just presence it. And there's that organic, natural unfolding of remembrance that I don't even have to try. Just keeps unfolding. So it's my share. I also resonated with what you said with the softening too.
Because it's interesting, because in a sense, it's like all those words, it's like on some level, they're all the same thing, right? It's just like a different sort of like, you're looking at it through a different lens, right? But like in essence, they all sort of weave into one another. Because remembrance on some level, when I drop into that, it feels like when I remember, I trust and I soften, and then I remember, and then I just love it.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, because honestly, I don't want to be that, like, I can just tell I'm the chaos person in this moment. And I'm just bringing that energy, and I've just been in that energy. And I appreciate you guys so much for just like holding the space while I'm not fully in like a very feminine place. And I wanted to also say that I feel like I said that I had the same thing about integration, about about feeling the remembrance. Like I have those epiphany moments, and when we've had our calls, I'm like deep in the remembrance, and that's why my eyes are just pouring, and I just like, because I'm just feeling. But the integration process is like when I don't remember, and I have to constantly kind of help myself be in that space of remembering again without it being too harsh, you know? And I've learned so deeply this past 2 weeks that I have to be like really okay with being a complete mess. Like I've just been so deeply in my pain of how disconnected the world is from the feminine, and just feeling it so profoundly that I'm like, you know, just 2 days ago, I was like running out of my bar three blocks down the street just to cry desperately in public because I realized like it's so painful here. But like, you know, I don't know. It's just also, I know that I got these teachings with you guys at the time that I needed to like go right into this really profound like boot camp kind of place in the earth, and like still find a way to hold the space for myself. But yeah, it's just kind of chaotic, and I just appreciate you all. I really want to do good, but I have to really be okay with the fact that I'm just gonna be the best that I can and fall off the wagon and then come back up. And yeah, it's so loud. I'm so sorry. But I really did hear you guys deeply. And Talitha, thank you so much for everything you said, because that's why I'm so grateful that I was able to make it, because those little things really, really just helped me come back to my center and back to my womb. So, and I'm so happy to hear you guys' voices and see your faces. They're really, it's just so kind and nice. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for sharing. And I just want to like reflect and affirm that like surrendering to the mess is like where the healing is. You know, like we're all a mess. Like like when we look at the world and like the state of the world and the state of the earth and the amount of like wounding and trauma that we collectively hold, like no one is not a mess. And you know, I think we're like starting to collectively leave behind a little bit this story that like being like put together and like bypassing the mess is what a healed person is. We're like starting to let go of that a little bit, because to me it's actually dysregulation, because it means you can't be, it means you have to be disassociated from the mess in order to function, right? And to me, like regulation is like being able to surrender to every cue of your body, whether that's going into a flight response or a fight response, or and then being able to come out of it because you actually went through it, or whether it's like being overcome by grief or rage. It's like a sign that you're reassociating, that you're like re-embodying, right? That you're landing back in yourself. And the truth is there's so much, like we have so much within us, not just personally but like collectively and ancestrally. And you know, I had a period where like when I started to like really open up to that in myself, where I was like, oh yeah, I'll do all of this processing so that I get it out of my system, so that I don't have to be a mess anymore. And that was also just a controlling mechanism as well, because the truth is like, as long as I'm on this earth in a human body, I'm going, like, there will be a part of me that is a mess, and there will be grief, and there will be rage, and there will be times where I am so overcome by it that I am incapacitated, that I'm completely overwhelmed by it. And when I like made peace with that, and I was like, as healed as I will ever be in my life, I will always have that too. And like actually allowed myself to dissolve the false mythology of the woman who's healed and like is just like perfect all the time. Like that was when I found such a deeper sense of peace when those experiences would come. because it was just like, oh, this is literally what life is. This is literally what I chose, not just to like heal and sort of prove that I can overcome it all, but also to be in it fully, you know, and really like releasing the judgments of like that any of it is a problem to begin with. Like the reaction is actually highly intelligent and beautiful, right? To be able to react to so much suffering and distortion in the world around us is such a sign of health and regulation and embodiment and association like to our bodies. And I just want to reflect that like for you, for myself, like because when it comes, it comes really strong, and the more our capacity deepens, the more intense it can sometimes become, and like we get better at holding it, but we also become able to hold more. And yeah, I've also really started like thinking a lot about like also the way that we sort of like to root our identity into the part of ourselves that is the most put together and presentable. And then when the other part comes up, we go, oh, yeah, but that's not really me. I'm just having a process. And then, like, as long as we're in that completely, like, total mess, we're not proud of who we are until we get out of it. And then, oh, I'm so proud of myself. I moved through that. And actually realizing, like, what the fuck is that? Like, when I am a complete mess, when I'm completely surrendered to me, like the dark mother and the grief and the rage and the pain that she holds. And I've started like allowing myself to like also connect my identity to that as well. So when I'm in that, it's not like, oh, this is not who I really am. Like, oh, just so everyone knows, I'm actually not like that, you know? Actually being like, oh, that's me too. Like that's power too. That's a healing woman as much as the other thing is. And also being conscious of like the people and things and places where like that is not allowed, where there is distortion, where there is a false presentation, and like walking away from that shit because I want nothing to do with spaces or people who present that mythology. I think it's highly distorting and highly harmful, you know? And but just a lot of that process is just actually feeling really shitty, you know? And then being like, wait, it's okay to feel shitty and not be like, oh, but I trust feeling shitty. It's like, no, like you can actually just feel absolutely like shit and feel so heartbroken. And it's okay to be there without having to have this moment of like, oh, but can I prove to myself in this moment that I'm above it? You know, that has been really liberating because it like I realized how much energy I was losing, constantly trying to be above it and prove to myself in every moment that no matter how bad I felt, I could still, you know, I still was above it or it still wasn't who I was. And actually just like letting all that go gave me so much more energy to just be in it. You know, I was just bleeding this past weekend. I spent like 2 days hysterically crying all day, in the bath crying, in bed crying, going to sleep, waking up at 4 a.m. crying, right? And just being like, and there, like the part of me that goes, oh no, what does this mean? Am I about to, is this what's about to, am I going to be like this now? Like, and then just like catching that and being like literally, what? It's just me being a human. And it's also, to me, it's a symptom of healing. Healing is painful. Healing is purging. And so when we're in those really deep purgative processes of purging grief and heartache and rage, we are actively healing. We're actively purifying, and we are like setting free all of that shit that we've been carrying and that our ancestors have been carrying and that our, you know, the collective has been carrying. And those are the moments that I think we remind ourselves and are proud of ourselves and go, look at me, I'm healing. Not when we finish it, we give ourselves a pat on the back because like now I can go back out into society and be a normal person. But like in the moment, to affirm to yourself and to be proud of yourself of like, I am like literally facing all of this in a world that is constantly pushing me to ignore it and bypass it and hide from it. I'm actually facing it completely and absolutely, and I'm letting it overcome me and I'm surrendering to it. And the power and strength and embodiment that that requires is profound, you know? So I just want to like affirm that because it's such an important truth, you know, that like I feel like we can't hear enough, honestly. Mm. And the other thing I just want to say is that like none of these things happen linearly. So it's not like I'm activating and releasing and then I'm integrating and then right like these things they overlap, right? So part of our integration can be a huge purging process. It can be a massive healing, you know, and nothing is happening sort of like one after the other. These experiences overlap, and we also don't need to always be able to identify what stage we're kind of in order to just trust where we're at, because the truth is wherever your body is the truth, you know. There's literally like that is like one of the absolute greatest anchors we will ever have. Wherever your body is truth. It doesn't have to be the truth always. It might just be something you need to move through, you know, in your process, but in that moment it is the truth, and we don't need to understand it or know it or, you know, or sort of like control it. Mm. 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 Yeah, and I also feel called to mention too, just like the importance of supporting the body through that practice, through the integration, because it is something our body goes through, and the body is metabolizing a lot when it's integrating. And so, like, you know, the idea of spaciousness is also like having space to feel what needs to be felt, but also having space to sort of like complete the circuit of that process. You know, the importance of like moving our bodies, you know. And I personally, when it comes to like somatics and integration and stuff, my personal perspective on movement is like intuitive movement rather than like, and I love exercise like as a staple in one's life, you know, whatever exercise resonates with you. But I feel like when it comes to integration, intuitive movement that is not, you know, a circuit, that is not like a, you know, a series of steps, but actually movement that just allows the body, and this can be like the most subtle thing in the world, but like I really, there was a profound shift in my experience of just like my nervous system and my ability to integrate my experiences when I actually started allowing and dropping into movement. you know, and like this emphasis on non-linear intuitive movement. So movement that, like, where the spine is not in a, yoga is beautiful, but it's linear. You're in these very sort of straight aligned positions. But non-linear movement, which is really important to somatics, is actually like allowing the spine to come out of its alignment, and actually noticing like where does the body want to actually express, because the grief and the rage and the pain and the trauma that we hold is in our tissue. It's not just in our emotional body or in our mind. It is literally in the tissue. And I spent a lot of time, years, doing all that work emotionally and mentally without ever getting into my body. And then when I started getting to my body, I was like, oh shit, it's all a lot of that stuff still there. Like I'm still holding it in the tissue. So actually, like just letting the body just move. And this is where like children are the greatest teachers, because kids are always like just like moving or making sound or just allowing themselves to move through processes. And because most of us have had a disassociated experience with our body, it's not natural anymore for us to move when we need to process something, right? But the movement is literally like that contraction and expansion of the muscle, of the tissue, is actually so supportive in the literal releasing of charge and energy, and so I think it's so supportive to incorporate like a little movement somatic practice. For me, like it's so simple. Sometimes I dance and it's much more energetic, but a lot of times it's just like rolling my hips, also allowing it to be sensual. I feel like we need to touch on this, because when it comes to like moving through and metabolizing trauma and like stuff that we're holding in our bodies, pleasure is such an important part of that experience, and it's not spoken of enough, because pleasure is what allows us to soften and expand. And very often when we're self-regulating and we're like metabolizing charge and trauma, we can get so caught up in the contraction of it that we just are like contracting and contracting without that natural expansion, right? Which is like what the nervous system does. It like titrates, it expands and it contracts. And pleasure is so powerful to incorporate into our movement somatic healing practices. Like when I'm in a rage practice, it's like I'm raging and then like I'm like, ooh, actually, and then I'm like really angry and then I'm like, wait, actually, and like actually incorporating pleasure, like rolling the hips, like allowing for that super sensual, even like sexual expression, and being able to connect like, oh, when I'm in rage, like there's so much power in my body, there's so much life force, and it's so easy for that like to jump over into like sexual power and energy and sensual expression. And what that does is it's titrating us, right? So like instead of getting locked into like the contraction, which can actually sometimes like we can spiral into disassociation because we're just going too much into the contraction, that pleasure reminds us to come out of it. So like whenever I'm in a deep somatic practice and I'm grieving or I'm raging, something I have to remind myself to do, which I don't automatically do because my thing is to freeze and just be like fetal position, right? Is I remind myself like just start moving a little bit, and I just like get out of my bed and I just like roll my hips and I still allow the emotional process or the raging or the crying or the sounds, but then I like drop just for a second into my yoni and into my womb and into my pelvis, and I give myself a moment of like that pleasure, and that pleasure creates such an expansion, which is really important when it comes to then healing and regulating and moving all that charge. And the beauty of that too is like realizing like, and this is like just a powerful experience for women to have, to just be like, I'm just like holding all of this, right? Like I'm raging, I'm grieving, I'm heartbroken, but also like sort of turned on, like what the like the full spectrum of woman. And that's, interestingly enough, that is what has like made me fall in love with when I'm a mess. It's made me fall in love with when I get really angry and I need to rage, or when I'm really in grief, because I embrace it so radically to the point of actually experiencing pleasure in the very practice that it's such a liberating experience of who I am as a woman, that it's like literally rewired the way that I understand myself, right? And the way that I relate to like discomfort. When I get really pissed, there's a part of me that gets like a little excited because I'm like, ooh, maybe I'm gonna go into the studio and put on my headphones and listen to like some super like, I don't know, ragey music, and then just like roll around on the floor and like be angry but like also sensual, and like I get like excited about it, right? So that's like the really like radical step to that is like, can I like, and to me it's literally this experience of like getting sensual with the pain and the rage and the energy and giving yourself permission. And this is like embodying the dark mother, the dark goddess, who like literally dances with, you know, all of these like heavy experiences. And sometimes the grief is so much that we can't be there, right? And that's important to acknowledge. Sometimes like there's not a fucking chance and we're just going to be in the fetal position and we're going to cry, and like that's what we need. But then coming out of that, coming from that state of like just totally falling apart back into your body, incorporating movement, even self-touch, and just like actually giving yourself permission to like weave all those pieces together, it brings you back in the body and it brings you back into pleasure. And pleasure is one of the most healing experiences we can give our nervous system and we can give our somatic experience. So I just wanted to mention that because I feel like it's a big piece.
I'm gonna do that after the call. I'm like, my whole body is like, ooh, yeah, let's bring pleasure to all this expansion and grief. So thank you for that reminder and that invitation. I'm curious, you had mentioned the yoni mapping. Is that something that, we can do intuitively, or is there actually like a system or something that you had learned around that?
Yeah, so my experience with it has been intuitive. I think it's something we can all do intuitively. You know, you can certainly like, if you want to, there's certainly, probably courses you can take and things, people you can learn from. But for me, I just started super intuitively, like, and I think just like starting with like the external vulva is the first step, because like there are like gates, leading into the womb space. And so just starting like with the vulva, like, like the most basic thing is just like vulvar cupping, like just like holding your hand on your yoni and then starting to like, using a little bit of oil or something and just like massaging, like actually like you would massage like a sore muscle, and like very gently. You don't want to go like super deep because if you have like fascial adhesion or like, any sort of tension, you don't want to like go too deep in it. Like I really believe in like a softer, sort of gentler, approach. But just like massaging all around the vulva and just like noticing like, what if I just like allowed myself to massage myself there like I would anywhere else in my body, and like just noticing like what feels good and what doesn't. And even like I just like to like trace my fingers and just notice like, are there parts like of the vulva that are like that resist, so I might notice like I touch a part and it's like, oh, that feels so good, and I open. But then maybe I touch somewhere else and I actually notice like a contraction. Another thing to be really aware of is like the emotional response. So like frustration, very, very common, like getting super frustrated suddenly and being like, this is stupid. Like, I don't like this. That's like, you just touched a nerve. You touched something that was stored and now your body is trying to like get you out of it. Or like disassociating where you're like doing your practice, but you're like thinking about something else, or getting really bored, finding it like annoying or boring. These are all like ways that your body is telling you that you're touching something that's stored there and it's like almost a little too much. So you're like trying to get away from it, which is why I really like believe in going super slow. And then like I will just work the outer vulva until I sort of feel like open, sort of like, before you have sex, like penetrative sex, like, the vulva wants to feel like, she wants to feel ready. She wants to feel like, oh, like now you can enter, but not till I feel like, it's time. So sort of doing the same thing, like not just sticking the fingers like in immediately when actually, because we're working with, there's so much trauma stored in the pelvic bowl for women, right? So like when she sort of feels ready, it's like, okay. And I always ask permission. So like I'll place my fingers at the opening and I'll be like, can I enter? And if I feel like a no, then I ask, what do you need for me to enter? And then sometimes I'll just be like, oh, I'll just get an image of like, I don't know, I want to be held here, or I just want to be touched, or today I don't want you to enter. I just want you to work with the outside, you know? And also like knowing that you're allowed to incorporate aspects of self pleasure. Like it doesn't have to be like the clinical, like I am simply, you know, like if you want to incorporate elements of self pleasure, a little clitoral stimulation to sort of like warm it up and open it up, right? Like knowing that you can like weave all of those pieces together. And then like just inserting the fingers and just like noticing and going super slow, you know? So like I just like to like sort of like imagine like the inside of the vagina, like I just map all the way out, like, and I'll notice like, oh wow, when I touch like here, it's like super numb and I can't feel anything, right? Numbness is a sign that the tissue is so overwhelmed with unintegrated experience and charge and potentially trauma that you've like maxed out your capacity to feel. And most women, a lot of women have numbness inside the vagina where like you put your finger in, but you like can't totally feel what you're doing. Totally normal. So with numbness, like for me, it's just a practice of like, I just like literally hold my finger to that place. And I just start to notice like maybe tension in my body, or maybe I go like I'm crying, or I'm like making lots of sound, or like rage will come up suddenly and I'll like go through a whole like crazy rage process, right? Because of something that was held there. Now I've had a lot of sexual trauma. So for me, there's a lot of that still stored there. You know, it's a different experience for everyone, but all women have, I believe, we hold some degree of unintegrated sexual charge because we've all had sexual experiences that like didn't totally honor us or feel good. But just going like really, really slow, like I started out way too ambitious and like didn't really like pace myself, which sort of like pushed me away from it for a while. But just like, I just love to just like, I literally just leave my finger in there and I just gently press different points. And sometimes there's like a really sore muscle inside. And that's where you can do like gentle massage and just like gently massage that muscle, which is really, really helpful. But a lot of the time, I'm just like, sometimes I'll stroke or I'll just like press the finger and I'll just sort of like notice every emotion that comes up. And I let myself cry, I let myself make sound, I let myself scream, I let myself shake if I need to shake, because essentially I'm like releasing everything that's been stored there. But it's been seriously like the most powerful practice I've ever engaged with. It's also been one of the hardest practices I've ever engaged with because it touches so deeply on like core wounds. But yeah, I love it. It's also totally changed my relationship to like my yoni and just like my pelvic space, and so much sensation has returned. Like my tissue has changed. Like your tissue literally changes because the more you're bringing circulation, the more lubricated and circulated that tissue gets. It's, yeah, it's just such an amazing practice. But it's challenging. I will just add, like, you meet a lot of your, bye Isis, love you, beauty. But you meet like the shadows are there, you know. But it doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes I'll just go like a week, every day, 10 minutes, I just touch the same spot. Like if I've found a spot that just feels like it holds a lot of stuff, I'm just with that spot every day and I just hold my fingers 5-10 minutes and I just do whatever I need to do, feel whatever I need to feel. Sometimes the feeling is so much numbness that you can't feel anything, and that's also just something to be with, to just like be in like the void sensation, which is overwhelm. But yeah, it's a totally intuitive thing. Even like 5 minutes a day of just like touching and putting your fingers just like on, in, or around is like, it's so powerful because you also start to like root your consciousness into the literal root of the body, and you start to become like aware of it in your day. You're like, oh my God, I'm like clenching the left inner side of my vagina right now. Why am I doing that? Oh, I'm like uncomfortable or scared or controlling of the situation, you know? But yeah, I love it. And I think it's so easy to do intuitively, and just to do it really patiently without any expectations of progress, because it's super nonlinear. And if we approach it like we do other modalities, like I need to progress and I need to, it becomes really, really challenging. It is like a very nonlinear, slow, sort of like just getting intimate and familiar with your tissue and like talking to it. And, you know, even just like having the practice of like placing my fingers in my body and just like talking to her and just like saying all of those things that like my body and that tissue has like needed to hear or didn't hear, you know, has been so powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so beautiful, and I can't wait to get to know my yoni that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I just wish well, I was going to say I wish I started it sooner, but like I'm ready to start it before I start. I couldn't have handled it. Yeah. Mm. Mm. I wonder if there's anything else on anyone's heart that they wish to speak into the space, that they wish to share. Mm. So I think we'll just maybe close with like a little practice. Just sort of take a moment to notice, like, oh yeah, Alexandria is writing something. I want to ask a question about journaling and speaking or voice notes as a form of integration. How can we know if those forms of expression are working in terms of integration or happening from a place of embodiment? I feel like I've been trying to work through not being disassociated, disembodied when it comes to reading, writing, speaking. Yeah, yeah. Well, so for me, the way that I sort of relate to the value of a journaling practice is really noticing whether or not, like when I'm journaling, I'll usually have moments of like, oh, that's what I was feeling. Oh, that's what that was about. Or I'll find myself journaling something that I almost want to like underline and like I almost want to put like a sticky note up and be like, this is the piece, remember this piece or that piece, or whatever it is. And that's not necessarily because we have to have, you know, the package with the bow on it, but having sort of conscious awareness of certain pieces that you're moving through, you know. For a lot of us, sometimes like you don't like just the process of writing can sort of bring that out. Just sort of like when someone asks you a question, sometimes you start talking and then you find yourself saying something and you're like, oh wow, that's actually how I feel. So the value of those practices is like, is it bringing you closer to what you're actually feeling? Is it bringing to your awareness something that you weren't aware of previously? It's sort of like surfacing some of this. For me, I'm much more vocal. Like I like to write, but I don't do too much journaling. I find that it's just like not my form of processing. So I talk to myself like crazy. I talk to the trees and I talk to my dog and I like vocally process and share things all the time, right? Or with my husband. And that's like really helpful for me. But to me, it's this piece of like, is what I'm bringing through, whether writing or speaking, is it actually bringing up a piece like that I almost like want to pin, like something that now is on the surface that previously was below the surface. And just sort of noticing like one of those practices might be more supportive for you. With regard to, I feel like you wrote something about disassociation when it comes to reading, writing, speaking. Yeah, and with that, I would say like slowing the process down a lot, or even doing like a journaling process where you're actually conversing like with your body. So for example, where you like your prompt is like asking your body, how do you feel about this? What, like, where are you right now? And then actually taking a moment to drop into the body and then sort of like channeling the body, right? Sort of like, people do journaling exercises to channel their guides or to channel an ancestor, to channel your higher self, whatever it is. Actually doing this with the body and slowing down the process so that you're actually checking in first with the body, and then noticing like when is it that you disassociate or feel that like coming out of your body a little bit, or maybe like dropping too much into the mind, actually slowing that process down and like checking in or starting with the body, if that makes sense. And then also knowing that sometimes it's supportive to just have a moment where we go through a mental process, and that's okay too, to like go through the mental process and then reread what you just did and then go, okay, and then dropping into your body and letting that sink in, right? Like it's okay to have our little mental processes here and there. Like let me know how that's landing for you, if there's anything like other sort of questions that you have around that. Yeah, I really love the journal practice of like channeling your body, or even channeling your womb, like having a journal conversation with your womb and just free writing, like channel writing, and just seeing what sort of comes out, is really, really beautiful. I also love, if I've been keeping a journal, rereading the journal that I was keeping during a certain period that I'm looking to integrate, and sort of like checking back and just like reflecting on like just everything that was alive for me during that time. That's like a favorite for me. Just sort of like reflecting back, contrasting with where I am now, and just sort of like noticing where I'm at in comparison, and also remembering things, because we move through a lot of stuff and we sometimes can't remember all of it, not that we have to, but sometimes like rereading and reflecting on things or listening to old voice notes can be really supportive in integration as well. Mm. Mm. Just taking a moment to just notice, like, what does your body want in this moment? Do you want closed eyes? Do you want opened eyes? And just sort of noticing, like, in this moment, would it be most supportive for me to be connected to my body and to the inner sensations and the experiences of my body? Or would it be more supportive for me to be in connection to my environment? Right? And that's up to you, right? There's one is not better than the other. So just sort of noticing what would be more supportive. And just taking a moment to settle into that. If the eyes are closed, just sort of settling into the body and just noticing the sensations that are most alive, that are most present. And if you're looking and connecting to the environment, just slowly looking around and noticing what you see, and sort of allowing your gaze to sort of rest on and meditate on it. Seeing if you can press the feet to the ground, to the floor. And you don't have to press hard, but you're just like getting some contact and connection between the soles of your feet and the surface beneath you. So I'm almost like doing like pressing on my left foot, pressing on my right foot, and just sort of like engaging, awakening that awareness on the soles of my feet. We can even press the palms together in like a prayer pose. And just taking a moment to like attune to the energy that you're integrating. And you don't need to know any of this consciously. This is totally intuitive. Just seeing if you can sort of visualize the body, the energy body, and seeing if there's some energy that you can sort of visualize just intuitively, trusting your imagination. And just see, how do you perceive that energy in the body, the energy that you are integrating, that you are working with. No need to understand it. And just see if you can connect your awareness actually to that energy and just notice how you experience it. Just relaxing the body. If you want to move, you can move, or you can be still. And just see what happens as you breathe into that energy. Maybe notice where in the body that energy is sitting. Where is that energy gravitating towards? And you're just acknowledging the energy, the spirit of it, not understanding it. You don't need to know what it is. What does it feel like to be present with this energy? How does your body respond to it? I'm just inviting some super gentle, subtle movement into the body, and you're sort of like moving with this energy. Just noticing how it wants to move. You're circulating this energy with the body. Mm. I'm just seeing if you can like maybe call some of that energy down into the womb space. Just see what it feels like to rest in the womb space. Maybe placing the hands on the womb, on the yoni. Maybe gently rotating, rolling the hips a little bit. And just sort of inviting that energy to settle. And then seeing if you can call that energy all the way down to the soles of the feet. And if you want to move the legs and the feet, you can, whatever feels right, just calling that energy down to the soles of the feet. And you're imagining that this energy is even moving through the soles of the feet and grounding into the earth. And you're just asking the earth to receive you, just feeling your connection to the earth. And if the eyes are closed, you can gently open them. Just notice your environment again. Sort of place yourself where you are. Really noticing what's around you. Still feeling the body, holding awareness of your body, but also holding awareness of your environment. And just being here fully, being in the body, being in your environment. Hmm. Hmm. Such a joy to connect with all of you. Like truly, I just love the conversations. I love the vulnerability and the just beauty of this space and everything that comes through it. Sending so much love, so many blessings. I know that you're always welcome to reach out with any questions about anything. And yeah, this video is going to go in the program materials. And I will also include at the end of the program materials a little note, a little practical, very practical, sort of intellectual, structural note on integration for anyone who's curious.
It's been such a profound joy, and yeah, I have so much love for all of you. Thank you, Talitha, for holding such a profound space. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, love. So much love. Boom hugs. Bye.
Bye.